Class, we've been looking at ways that the Earth's surface changes as a result of some byproducts of plate tectonics. So we looked at volcanoes and we looked at earthquakes and how they change the Earth's surface. And we're going to look at some other ways that the Earth's surface changes and we get all these features that we see today. So what we're going to look at is a concept called weathering and erosion. These are two different things. And what you're going to do is use this note sheet. You're going to take notes on the whole front page here in today's notes. If I go too fast or anything like that, feel free to stop the video, back it up, or do whatever you need to do to get everything down onto your notes. Cool. All right. So let's get started here. So what exactly is weathering? Weathering is a process that changes. So change is the key word here. It's doing something to rocks to change them, generally breaking them into small little pieces we call sediments. It can be done by breaking. It can be done to grind them smaller. It can alter them somehow, anything that we get smaller pieces of those rocks. And what's important about weathering, one of the things, is that it has to occur to make these rock pieces small enough that erosion can move them later, okay? So we can't have erosion unless weathering has made the pieces small enough to move them around. Okay. So some examples here of erosion. You see this rock, or excuse me, weathering. You see this rock being broken apart. You see the caves forming. These are both types of weathering. So there's two categories of weathering. The first is mechanical weathering, and this is the breaking of rocks into small pieces by some physical force, okay? So you can think of like a hammer hitting a rock. That would be mechanical weathering. Not what we're going to talk about, but that's a simple example of the idea of a physical force breaking rocks into smaller pieces. Okay, so the first one is what's called abrasion. Abrasion is where you have wind-blown sand, for example, scraping rocks. And as it scrapes rocks, it breaks off pieces of those rocks. And this can be done by wind-blown sand. It can be done by water in a river where rocks are ground together, or by glaciers. So these are all types of abrasion. It's basically rocks being scraped together, okay? The next one is ice wedging. Ice wedging happens when water seeps in cracks in rocks and then freezes and expands, and it basically breaks those rocks into smaller pieces. We have plate movement that you're familiar with. This is plate tectonics. So as the plates move, they grind against each other, and that grinding action breaks off little pieces of rock. And then the last one is plants and animals. So plants, as they put their roots down into or near rocks, they can break or scrape or pry rocks apart in gaps. And then animals digging their tunnels and their burrows can do the same thing, breaking off little pieces and wearing that down into smaller sediments. So these are all types of mechanical weathering, physical processes changing the rocks into smaller pieces. So the other one we have is what's called chemical weathering. This is the other process, and this is usually involving water or some sort of acidic water that decomposes, dissolves, or loosens pieces of rock off and makes them smaller. So the classic example is acid rain, which will help you fill in the blank on your note sheet. And this is shown with the statue in the image here, and also rust. You leave your bike out in the rain, it starts to rust. It's altering. Those little flaky red pieces break off, okay? So that's the metal starting to get weathered. All right, so again, weathering, whether it is mechanical or chemical, is breaking rocks down into smaller pieces. We have to have that before we can have erosion. Now, erosion is the movement of those sediments. So once we have the small pieces, erosion is moving them around. And it's important because this is how the surface of the land changes. So weathering occurs when these little pieces are broken off and then carried somewhere else. So that changes the land. It reshapes the land through these two combined processes. The first way that can happen is through water, whether it is rivers, streams, the ocean waves, that kind of stuff will move sediments around. And then we have wind. I talked about this before, so it can pick up sediments and carry them to other places. We've got ice, which typically in this case we're talking about glaciers. So as the glacial ice moves, it pulls rocks and carries material with it and deposits it in other places. And we'll talk in more detail about that later. And then we have gravity. So, or in this case, what you will know as landslides. So this is where large amounts of material are being carried downslope to another location. So these are the types of weathering that we have. And erosion. So these are the two things that on a regular basis are changing the Earth's surface. All right, so what you're going to do today is a lab activity. You're going to fill out the lab sheet And also, you will do the lab by looking at all of the different videos and images that are in the Google Slides. Good luck.